Kenny Albert, who called that game last night, fresh off the plane from Boston, Westwood One radio network. Kenny, it's amazing to me how home ice in hockey doesn't have the same effect as it does in any other sport.
No, it never seems to. You look at teams that lose in the first round. Tampa Bay this year gets swept. Calgary, the number one seed in the West. Admit it, Alan, you had St. Louis in the pool heading into the playoffs.
I wanted St. Louis, yes. Nobody knew this except the one guy that made that bet.
Right.
Are you kidding me? But this is one of those unbelievable stories if you think about it. I mean, never mind the fact that it was 50 years that they had to wait from when they became a franchise. But that run of going from being in last place, which I think Elias said, it's the latest anyone was in last place in a season and went on in any sport and went on to win the championship. So the story, who would believe this if you told them in January?
Well, before the season, they had high expectations. They made a number of moves during the offseason. The NHL does a poll of their players, and they're not allowed to select their own team. I read last week that Marc-Andre Fleury and Connor McDavid preseason picked the Blues to win the Stanley Cup.
Come on.
They did have high expectations in St. Louis, but then they got off to a terrible start. They fired the coach, Mike Yeo, in November, late November.
Right.
Craig Berube takes over. Mm-hmm. He was an assistant coach. And the Rangers were there on December 31st in St. Louis, and the Blues at that time were in last place overall. Yep. January 3rd.
Bennington hadn't been called up yet.
Bennington was not called up yet. January 3rd, they're still in last place. He gets called up, makes his first start January 7th in Philly, and shuts out the Flyers. The night before was when the 5 Blues players went to an establishment in Philadelphia watching the Eagles-Bears playoff game, and the song Gloria came on the jukebox, and that became their theme song over the course of the rest of the season. 5 players were there, and the folks from that bar are flying down to the parade this weekend in St. Louis. They've adopted the Blues as their team in Philadelphia.
Imagine that. I mean, there's so many different stories with this team. But if you've heard Gloria, I'm sure, because you follow this team, how many times have you heard the song Gloria? Because
about 5,000.
How many straight games have you covered now, the Blues, because of your
19
broadcast schedule?
Between TV and radio, the last 19 games. The second round against Dallas from game 2 through 7.
Are you ever home?
The West Final against San Jose, and then the Stanley Cup Final. 19 straight St. Louis Blues games.
So you're the good luck charm.
One radio station after they beat Dallas in game 7 in round 2 played Gloria for 24 straight hours.
Nobody should ever
on a loop.
Nobody should ever have to listen
24
to that
hours.
Over and over
And
again.
they would play it after the wins in the locker room every game.
Right. Now, you did the game with Joe Micheletti, who's obviously also part of our family here at MSG. Joe played for the Blues. What did it mean for him?
Joe had some records broken during this postseason. Joe had an incredible playoff in 1981. He had 12 points in 11 games. And that was the record for a Blues defenseman in one playoff year. Alex Pietrangelo, their captain, broke the record this year. But Joe lived in St. Louis for 20 years. He played for the Blues. He was an assistant coach for the Blues, which not many people realize, for 3 years under Brian Sutter. And then he was a broadcaster for the Blues. He learned under the great late Dan Kelly. He was Joe's mentor when Joe first became a broadcaster. So I think it really meant a lot to Joe. So many of his former teammates, alumni, Bob Plager, there he is. I took that picture in the locker room.
You took this picture, right?
After the game last night.
Wow.
Bob Plager's numbers retired by the Blues. He was an original Blue. His brother, the late Barclay Plager, died at a young age. His numbers retired as well. Bob Plager's gloves became a symbol for the Blues this year. His old gloves that he wore when he played for St. Louis. You know, some teams have a belt or a hat.
Sure.
The Rangers have the Broadway hat.
Right.
Every Blues win, one of their players would be awarded Bob Plager's gloves from when he played back in the 70s.
Wow.
So he's a big part of it. Brett Hull was there, Bernie Federko, Keith Tkachuk. They all had an opportunity to raise the cup. Chris Pronger was at the game.
It's a franchise that has a good history and a great fan base, but the fact that they waited so long, the 50 years to win a Stanley Cup, it's amazing how the alumni actually feel part of it.
They do.
Because they all, went through
And they do have a great history.
Yeah.
They came into the league in '67, and the setup then, the original 6 teams were all in one division in the East. The 6 expansion teams in '67 were in the West. So one of them was guaranteed to make the final. And the first 3 years, it was the Blues with Scotty Bowman as their head coach. Al Arbour was their captain. They never won a game in the 3 final rounds. They were 0-12. And I had a great chat with Scotty Bowman earlier in the playoffs about those teams on the phone, and we used the information on the telecast. He remembers every goal every game. Just about anything about those early Blues teams in the Stanley Cup Final, it's still to Scotty Bowman like it happened yesterday.
There was no doubt who would win the Conn Smythe. Ryan O'Reilly.
No, I think there was some doubt.
You think there was?
Jordan Binnington, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Even though it's 4 straight games, he scores a goal.
Right.
The guy that did it last, his name was, what's his name again? Wayne what? Was
1985.
It Gretzky? Was it Gretzky?
Wayne Gretzky.
Who's that guy?
Here's one
That's
for
a
you.
pretty amazing record to tie.
First to score a goal in 4 straight games in the final since Gretzky. First ever to score his team's first goal in games 4, 5, 6, and 7. No one's ever done that before.
And that was a huge goal, and redirect, obviously. But you were in the building, and you must have felt that building, with the energy, obviously it's a Game 7, but how the Bruins were just putting it on the Blues. I mean, that was a pure dominance, that first 10 minutes, and they couldn't score. You've seen enough games to know what was coming next.
It was total dominance. It was like the first period in Game 5, which is one reason why I think a lot of people felt Binnington might win the Conn Smythe. It's the MVP for the entire playoffs, not just the final. Either one would have been a great choice, O'Reilly or Binnington. But O'Reilly, 5 goals over the last 4 games. He was playing with a cracked rib. He's a guy that never made it out of the first round. He's been in the league 10 years. He's another remarkable story.
It's just an incredible game. There's so many things we can talk about it.
And Binnington, the goalie, we mentioned earlier, made his first start January 7th. Last year, he's playing for the Bruins farm team. The Blues did not have room for him.
Oh, that's right. They had
2 goalies on their minor league team, and they didn't have their own team. They were sharing with Vegas.
Yeah.
So Binnington actually played for the Providence Bruins. Mike Dunham, a former Ranger, and Islander and Devil, right? He played for all 3.
Yeah.
He's the organizational goalie coach. So he did a lot of work with Binnington last year. Mike Dunham works for the Bruins. Binnington just beat them in the final.
Amazing. You think, this guy's an encyclopedia. You think he only knows hockey? No. He knows a lot more. He's all that information.
Make sure you check the facts.
No, please. I trust it with you.
For more great videos from the MSG 150, check out right there. And remember, our show is on Monday through Thursday, 8 to 10:30 p.m. on MSG Network and MSG Go.